In this video, we'll show you how to replace the starter on your Chevy Colorado. This is located on the driver's side of the engine, right in front of the transmission. Let's get started. To disconnect the negative terminal, we have a 10mm here up top. We'll go ahead and loosen that up. Once that's loose, you can wiggle the terminal and pull up. With the terminal disconnected, I like to wrap a rag underneath it and make sure that it is not going to make contact with the terminal. And we can remove the lug nuts with a 22mm. We need to remove the driver's side front fender liner. We have a bunch of T15 Torx bits that we're going to remove. We would have one here as well. Looks like that's missing. And we can remove the fender liner. Looking at the back portion of our intermediate drive shaft, this goes from our transfer case up to our front differential. We have 6 10mm bolts on the back side to remove. And we can do the same to the rest. Moving to the front portion of the drive shaft, we have 6 more 10mm. Before we remove the drive shaft, we need to mark it so that it goes back in the same place. We'll do one on this end and one on the other end as well. Get one end popped out. We can do the same on the other end. And we can remove the drive shaft. Looking up above the exhaust on the driver's side, we have the O2 sensor connector. I'm going to use a fork type pry tool to pop this out. You can use a flathead screwdriver. You can pull it out of the insulation. Pull the green tab out. We can pull up on the tab below that and pull out on the connector. Always check electrical terminals for any damage or corrosion. Looking underneath the engine cover towards the front of the engine, we have a hose clamp. We can use a flathead screwdriver or an 8mm. Go ahead and loosen that up. On the passenger side of the engine bay, we have another hose clamp holding our engine cover to the air intake box. Loosen that up. Go ahead and free that up from the intake box. Looking towards the back side of the engine on the driver's side, we can pull up on this hose, and that's going to come with the engine cover. We can remove the oil cap. We have a T30 Torx bit right in the front of the engine cover. And we can pick up on the engine cover. And we can set this off to the side. Reinstall the oil cap with the engine cover removed. On the driver's side, looking down on top of the valve cover here, we find the O2 sensor connector. There's a green tab. You can pull out on the green tab. Underneath that green tab is a black tab. We'll pull up on that. And that will allow you to release the connector. You always want to check the terminal connector for any damage or corrosion. Looking in the driver's front wheel well, we find the top of the catalytic converter attached to the head of the engine, and we have 4 15mm nuts we can remove. Towards the back of the catalytic converter, we have 3 15mm we can remove. And we can do the same on the other 3-bolt flange on the passenger side. Moving back from those, we have another 2-bolt flange with 15mm. With those 3 flanges loose, we can go ahead and drop down the catalytic converter. Looking up past the catalytic converter or in from the wheel well on the driver's side, we have 3 8mm bolts that we need to remove so that we can remove the heat shield. And you can remove the shield. You want to support your engine either from up top like this or using a jack stand from down below. Looking at the engine mount, we have 3 bolts to remove down bottom and 2 up top. We have one here that we can see. I have my socket on one, and then there's one that mirrors this one on the other side of the engine mount. We're using a 15mm socket. And we have 2 more 15s up top. Now we need to raise the engine up to get the engine mount out. Our engine mount bracket has 3 more 15s we need to remove. One down bottom here, one up top here, and one down here. And we can remove the bracket. On top of the starter, we have a 13mm nut. And we can remove the cable from the terminal. There's a tab on the lower part of the connector. You can press in on that and pull out on the connector. Always check your connectors for any damage or corrosion. We have 2 15mm bolts we can remove. And we can remove the starter. And we can install our starter. We can snug each of these down. And we can torque these to 43 foot-pounds. Get the electrical connector back in. Make sure it's fully seated and not going to pull back out. Get the terminal back onto the stud. Get the nut started on. And we'll snug that down. We can get the bracket lined up and in place over the starter, and we'll get the 3 bolts started in. We can snug those down. We can torque these to 37 foot-pounds plus an additional 60 to 75 degrees. We can get the engine mount lined up. We'll get the 3 lower bolts started in. As you lower down the engine, you want to be very careful not to damage anything in this area. And we'll just line up the bolt holes. We'll get the upper 2 bolts in and snug them down. We can torque all of our engine mount and bracket bolts to 37 foot-pounds plus 60 to 75 degrees. And get the heat shield lined up. We'll get the 3 bolts in and snug them down. We can remove the engine support. We can start to get the catalytic converter up into place. We'll get the flanges to line up. Get the O2 sensor plugged in. Make sure that locks in and is not going to pull back out. Get the green tab in. Make sure that's fully seated. And get the heat protection back on. And get that seated back on the transmission. We can get our upper O2 sensor plugged in. Going to make sure that that's fully seated and not going to pull back out. We'll get our green safety tab in. And make sure that's not going to pull back out as well. On the underside of our engine cover is part of our air intake system. We need to line up this grommet with the throttle body and this grommet with our air intake box. As you line up the engine cover, we need to line up the boots with each other. Reinstall the oil cap. And get the screw into the front portion of the cover. We'll snug that down. And get the hose on the back side into place. Make sure it's in the clip as well as seated all the way down into the rubber hose. Tighten down each of your hose clamps for the intakes. And line up the gasket with the top of the manifold. We can get one of our bolts started in. In our case, one of the nuts pulled off one of the exhaust manifold studs. We'll get just the stud started in. And then we can use a 7mm socket to turn it in until it bottoms out and then get the nut on it. Don't need to tighten the stud down too much. We can snug these four down. And we can torque these to 37 foot-pounds. Get your gasket on the flange. In our case, we had a couple of studs break. Can snug those down. And we can torque these to 37 foot-pounds. And we can do the same with the 3-bolt flange on the passenger side. Moving back to our 2-bolt flange, we can get both of the nuts on there. And we'll snug those down. And we can torque these to 37 foot-pounds. Get the drive shaft slid underneath the exhaust. Line up our marks. I've applied some blue thread locking compound onto the bolts. Got them in their shims, and we can install those. We'll go around and get all of them installed before tightening any of them down. We can snug these down. I'm going to use a small pry bar on the back side between the flange and the bolt ends. We can torque this to 47 foot-pounds. And we can do the same on the rear. We can install our fender liner. We had a few bolts break on us, so we're just going to use some new bolts in the front here. And get your negative terminal back on. And we'll tighten down that as well. Same as the positive terminal, doesn't need to be too tight. And get the wheel installed. I like to get the first lug nut in all the way, and that'll help hold the wheel while we do the rest. And we can snug these down in a star pattern. And we can torque these to 140 foot-pounds in a star pattern. Start up the vehicle and make sure you don't have a check engine light. Thanks for watching.
When only the best will do, demand TRQ. The only company that lets you view before you do. TRQ is committed to offering the highest quality aftermarket auto parts that are engineered for peace of mind. Thanks for using and viewing with TRQ.